She would never forget that day. Margaret, who had been cleaning the Manhattan Financial Center for 15 years, came to work that morning knowing nothing would ever be the same. Her biggest secret was about to be revealed, unexpectedly. Margaret Williams was a 67-year-old, portly woman who always looked tired. She arrived at work at 6 in the morning and cleaned until midnight in one of Manhattan's most prestigious financial districts. Her hands always smelled of detergent, her hair was perpetually disheveled, and she wore torn shoes. The old bag she carried, her patched gloves, and her faded uniform made her indistinguishable from even the other cleaning staff. The company's employees barely noticed her. Margaret was practically invisible. They passed her in the hallways but didn't even say hello. Some found her annoying, complaining about the noise her cart, full of cleaning supplies, made. Younger employees would stop their phone calls when they saw her, postponing important matters as if Margaret wouldn't understand. They forgot the old woman was there, treating her like a piece of furniture. Margaret had become accustomed to this behavior. Over the years, she had been ignored, and sometimes belittled thousands of times. But she never complained. Because what truly mattered to her was something else. Working alone on night shifts in empty offices, Margaret was making grand plans in her own little world. That Tuesday morning, Margaret arrived at work as usual. But today, something was different. She carried an envelope in her pocket, and it both excited and worried her. Margaret's life story was very different from her appearance. She had immigrated to the United States from Jamaica in 1975. Back then, she was young, energetic, and had big dreams. But life had thrown unexpected surprises at her. Her husband, Robert, died in a construction accident. Margaret was only 28 and pregnant at the time. But 3 months after the baby was born, she died of sudden infant death syndrome. This double loss deeply shook Margaret's spirit. From those dark days, Margaret devoted herself entirely to her work. First, she cleaned hospitals, then worked in hotels. The meticulousness and honesty she displayed in every job earned her references. But the real turning point came when she started working at the Manhattan Financial Center in 1992. This job not only provided him with a source of income but also opened up a new world. In the early years, she focused solely on her job. But over time, while working the night shift, she began noticing discarded financial reports. Curious, she began reading these papers. At first, some terms she couldn't understand, but Margaret persevered. She visited public libraries and read financial literacy books. She learned about the internet and participated in online training. This learning process felt magical to her. She learned how the stock market worked, how companies were valued, and investment strategies one by one. During her night shifts, she would read the financial newspapers left by her employees and analyze market analyses. She would watch Bloomberg television and take notes on expert opinions on CNBC. While working the night shift, Margaret read discarded financial reports, analyzed stock market analyses, and learned about the inner workings of companies. Over the years, she compiled this information and began making her own small investments. But Margaret's true secret lay elsewhere. This woman, seemingly lost among thousands of people in the cold city atmosphere, was actually creating a quiet revolution. She was secretly donating 80% of her earnings to student education. There was a deep story behind Margaret's decision. After losing her child, she had been depressed for a long time. One day, while volunteering at a Harlem school, she saw children without educational opportunities. She saw traces of her own lost child in these children. From that moment on, she began to view these children as her own. She made her first donation in 1995. It was only $50, but it was a big step for Margaret. Over time, the amount grew. Through smart investments using her financial knowledge, her earnings increased, and her donations grew as well. Every month after receiving her paycheck, Margaret meticulously calculated the necessary amount. She would set aside the minimum amount to cover the rent, the electricity bill, and basic food needs of her small Bronx apartment, and then channel the rest into educational endowments. She never indulged in any extravagant expenses. She bought her clothes from thrift stores, prepared her meals at home, and never went on vacation. In her Bronx apartment, Margaret had a special box in her small bedroom closet. It held thank you letters from the students she had helped. Each letter gave her a new lease of hope. Ashley's letter from high school graduation, Maria's thank you notes from college acceptance, Jonathan's photo from medical school. Margaret read these letters and felt like the richest person in the world. Margaret's giving system was highly organized. On the first Monday of every month, she would observe her own unique ritual. She would go to the First National Bank in the Bronx and wire transfers to various educational institutions. But she never used her real name. She would send her donations under the signature Anonymous Friend. The list of donations was staggering: money for school supplies for Harlem elementary schools, assistance with housing costs for college students, stationery and books, even some students' meals. Margaret meticulously researched each need, planning how to most effectively help. For 15 years, she lived this way. An invisible janitor by day, a secret philanthropist by night. No one knew her true life story. Her colleagues simply saw her as an old cleaning lady. But Margaret was happy with it. She wasn't doing it to brag, but to truly make a difference. That Tuesday morning, the envelope in Margaret's pocket was about to turn a new page in her life. Linda Rodriguez, a journalist for the New York Times, had been tracking Margaret for the past 6 months. While researching anonymous donations in education, Linda had noticed a steady stream of donations signed Anonymous Friend. The sheer size and regularity of these donations had made her suspicious. Linda had conducted a meticulous investigation: bank records, wire transfer tracking, interviews with recipient institutions, all clues ultimately pointed to Margaret Williams. But this discovery shocked Linda. She couldn't understand how a janitor could donate such large sums. When the journalist examined Margaret's financial records, she was even more astonished. Margaret wasn't just giving, she was also making extremely smart investments. She bought Apple stock before the company launched the iPhone, invested in Amazon early, and added Netflix to her portfolio while television companies were underestimating it. These investments had significantly increased Margaret's giving capacity. When Linda calculated the figure, it was staggering: a total of $450,000 in donations over 15 years. And that figure only included cash donations. Including Margaret's anonymous purchases of school supplies, books, and equipment, the total value reached $600,000. This figure was practically impossible on a janitor's salary. The reporter wanted to know how she managed it. When Margaret arrived at work that morning, everything was normal. But the atmosphere in the office had begun to change in ways Margaret hadn't noticed. The employees had ignored her as usual, but today they were even more indifferent. When Sarah, the company's 26-year-old marketing manager, stepped away with a look of disgust when she stepped onto the elevator with Margaret, telling her friend, "That woman's smell makes me sick." Michael, the 35-year-old financial manager, had turned red with rage when Margaret's cleaning cart had blocked his way into the meeting room. "I wonder when this woman will retire. She's too old now, she can't even do the job," he muttered to his friend. Jennifer, the young accounting specialist, had stopped talking on the phone when she saw Margaret. "I'll call later, there's someone here," she said, referring to Margaret, as if the person she was talking to would be bothered by Margaret's presence. This scene had happened hundreds of times before. Margaret had grown accustomed to this behavior, but it still hurt. That day, she was particularly tired because she had worked an extra shift the night before, sending the money she earned to a student's hospital bill that week in emergency situations. At noon, Margaret was eating a sandwich alone in the small break room on the company's rooftop, when she could hear the loud conversations coming from downstairs. Employees were visiting expensive restaurants during their lunch break and discussing their weekend plans. As Margaret ate a simple sandwich she'd brought from home, she calculated how much money she could send to each student that week. At 2:30 p.m., New York Times journalist Linda Rodriguez arrived at the company. She was surprised when the receptionist asked her about Margaret Williams. "A janitor? Why are you looking for her?" Linda smiled. "For a very important interview." Margaret's hands were shaking when she was summoned. She sat across from Linda in the company's conference room. The company's top executives gathered around them, eager to know what had happened. The silence in the room was impressive as Linda began speaking. The journalist opened her files and began her carefully prepared presentation. Over the past 15 years, Margaret Williams has donated a total of $450,000 in cash to 47 different educational organizations in New York. She also spent $150,000 on school supplies, technological equipment, and books. In total, she has provided over $600,000 in donations. Linda paused, surveyed the surprised looks in the room, and then continued, "Thanks to these donations, 312 students received a university education, 127 of whom graduated and are now working in jobs that benefit society. This has resulted in the training of 18 doctors, 23 engineers, 31 teachers, 15 nurses, 8 lawyers, and countless other professionals." Everyone in the room was stunned. Sarah's face was pale, her mouth hanging open. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at Margaret in shock. Jennifer's pen had fallen from her hand and she couldn't even pick it up. Linda continued to elaborate. Ms. Margaret regularly donates $2,240 of her $2,800 monthly salary, or 80%. She spends only $560 a month on herself. This money covers rent, basic groceries, and transportation. She has no luxuries. In the last 15 years, she's only gone to Jamaica once, when her mother passed away, and even that wasn't from the donation money, but from the extra shift fees she saved. These remarks completely transformed the atmosphere in the room. Margaret had never been treated with such respect. The company's CEO, David Henderson, stood up. How is this possible? Ms. Margaret, how did you manage this?" This was the first time Margaret had attracted so much attention. But she spoke shyly. "I didn't have children, sir. But education is the foundation of everything. These young people are like my children. Their success is my happiness." Linda also explained how Margaret saved her money. Ms. Margaret learned financial matters while working here. She made small, wise investments. But she never spent any of the money she earned on herself. Someone in the room asked, "So why did you keep it secret?" Margaret replied, "I'm not doing it to brag. I specifically made an anonymous donation so these children wouldn't know me. They don't need to thank me. Seeing them succeed is enough." From that moment on, Margaret's life changed. The company's employees viewed her differently. Sarah came to Margaret the next day and apologized. "Ms. Margaret, I treated you badly. I judged you before I even met you." Michael offered a similar apology. "I'm truly ashamed. You're a more valuable person than anyone else who works at this company." CEO David Henderson made Margaret a special offer. "Margaret, you're not just a cleaning lady anymore. We want to make you our company's social responsibility consultant. We'll triple your salary." But Margaret's response surprised everyone. "Thank you, but I love my cleaning job. I just want this story published. Maybe other people would like to do something similar." The New York Times report had a profound impact across America. Margaret's story went viral on social media. Television networks invited her for interviews. One of the most touching moments was when 15 of the students Margaret had helped came to the company to thank her. Dr. James Rodriguez, now a cardiac surgeon, teacher Maria Santos, and engineer David Kim, all had completed their education thanks to Margaret's philanthropy. "Aunt Margaret," they told her, "you are our lifesavers." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "No, my children, you made my life meaningful." The story didn't end there. Thousands of people, inspired by Margaret's example, began making similar donations. A movement called the Margaret Effect, a movement where ordinary people share their extraordinary stories of philanthropy, was launched on Facebook, reaching 50,000 members within a week. More importantly, Margaret's story caught the attention of Hollywood. Famed producer Steven Spielberg's company approached him about filming Margaret's life story. Margaret politely declined, saying, "If my story inspires others, you can do whatever you want." One of the students Margaret had helped, Dr. James Rodriguez, a heart surgeon now at Johns Hopkins Hospital, had prepared a special surprise for her. They had created a section in the operating room corridor called the Margaret Williams corridor. This corridor featured a display of photos and success stories of all the students Margaret had helped. Margaret, now 70, still works at the Manhattan Financial Center. She's not just a janitor, she also holds the title of the company's social impact consultant. CEO David Henderson gave her a private office and tripled her salary. Margaret continues to contribute 80% of this raise to charitable giving. She has a small desk in her office, and young employees consult her not only on philanthropic matters but also on life lessons. On Margaret's desk are current letters and photos from the students she has helped. On the walls are article clippings telling the stories of other donors she inspired. Most importantly, Margaret is no longer invisible. Every morning when she arrives at work, employees greet her and ask how she's doing. Sarah has become one of Margaret's closest friends, seeking her advice on financial planning. Michael, inspired by Margaret, has begun donating 20% of his salary to local educational institutions. Jennifer was so moved by Margaret's story that she volunteers at schools in Harlem after work. "Aunt Margaret taught me what true success is," Jennifer says. Margaret's story teaches us something important. True value isn't hidden in appearance, but in the depths of the heart. Sometimes the greatest heroes live in the most unexpected places, disguised as the most ordinary people. And perhaps there are other Margarets around us that we don't even notice right now. To see them, we just need to put aside our prejudices and truly look. On the last page of the small notebook on Margaret's desk are these words: "Money isn't for saving, it's for sharing. Happiness grows by giving, diminishes by hiding." These words epitomize her philosophy of life. And perhaps they can be a guide for all of us. Margaret Williams's story demonstrates how deceptive appearances can be, where true value can be found, and how even the smallest gesture can transform a life. She still comes to work every morning at 6. Her hands still smell of detergent. But now everyone knows that everything those hands touch turns to gold. Because Margaret's hands plant hope and nurture the future. And this is perhaps the most precious treasure money can't buy.